Welcome to Voice for Infection Prevention, where we explore the latest developments, challenges, and insights in the field of infection prevention and control. With a passion for promoting patient safety and healthcare excellence, we're excited to bring you engaging discussions with experts, leaders, and innovators in the field. So whether you're a seasoned professional or just beginning your journey in infection prevention, welcome to the conversation. This is Voice for Infection Prevention.
Welcome back to Voice for Infection Prevention. Today I'm talking with Shaunte Walton, a leader who has helped pave the way for diverse backgrounds in infection prevention. With her microbiology and molecular diagnostics background, Shaunte transitioned into infection prevention despite the challenges of breaking into a traditionally nurse-dominated field. She shares how mentorship, networking, and earning her CIC certification helped her advance into a system-wide leadership role at UCLA Health. We also dive into her passion for mentorship and workforce development, including how she's helping grow the next generation of infection preventionists through training programs and career pathways. If you're looking for insights on career growth, leadership, and making an impact in infection prevention, this is an episode you won't want to miss. Let's get started.
This episode is sponsored by Clutch Recruitment, the leading recruiting firm in the country, recruiting exclusively within infection prevention and control.
All right, so let's get started. And I'm gonna start off the same way that I've started with all of these. And I'm curious as to how you found infection prevention. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, and it seems to be the trend that people just kind of fell into it.
Okay.
So I'm curious, are you the same? Did you fall into infection prevention, or how did you discover this as a field you could really grow?
Yeah. And I have a really interesting story around this. And I'll start from the very beginning. I promise it will make sense once I complete the story. So I remember in college, so I went to Xavier University of Louisiana, and one of my microbiology instructors had a brief segment in his presentation about other fields outside of medicine. So, if you know anything about Xavier University of Louisiana, their primary focus is placing African Americans into medical school. But they understood that there are other important fields that are available. And this particular professor shared a brief introduction into epidemiology. And it really piqued my interest. So I was like, okay, let's just keep that in the back burner and see if that's something that I would be interested in. His focus was mainly on public health. So I thought, not really interested in doing that piece of it, but maybe there's something down the line that I can maybe look into. And so when I graduated from college with my degree in microbiology, and then I started finding my passion was always laboratory medicine. I was like, okay, that's what I know that I want to do. And we'll see where we go from there. And molecular microbiology, I fell in love with and started doing work around that in various firms. Now, when I transitioned from doing research development for pharmaceutical companies, I moved into the clinical world, and I knew that I was getting closer to my calling. I started doing infectious disease laboratory testing on the molecular side. So HPV is doing all HIV genotyping, HCV, all those sorts of platforms, and immediately thought, okay, I'm getting closer. I know this is going to be for me, but there's something more that I want from this work. Yes, I love the infectious disease component of this, but there has to be something else where that would bring me closer to the patient. And so when I transitioned away from a reference laboratory and I worked in a freestanding children's hospital in Texas, we ramped up quickly a molecular diagnostics laboratory. And one of the first platforms that we started was DNA fingerprinting. Lo and behold, our primary customer was the infection prevention department. And so when I started doing this work and in the laboratory, I'm like, oh my gosh, these samples are identical, indistinguishable. Where does it go from here? And I connected with the infection prevention team to understand what happens after we give them these results. And when I met with that team, I knew then, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And so I asked more questions and absorbed everything that I could about infection prevention. And at that time, now this is 2008, this is at a time where nurses dominated this field.
Yep.
And so when I had my conversations with those individuals, they were just like, well, you might have to go to nursing school to be able to transition. I'm just like, nope, I'm gonna prove them wrong. I'm gonna figure out a way that I'm gonna break into this field. And so I started looking around. Many of the job descriptions required 5 years of clinical experience. If you're working in a laboratory, that would count, but they wanted 5 years. And so I worked the day of my 5th-year anniversary in the laboratory is the day I transitioned in infection prevention. So
Wow.
I always knew that this was something that I wanted to do as soon as I got into that exposure to the department. So,
Wow.
yeah,
Okay.
it was
Okay.
amazing.
Very cool. All right. So let me take one step back because that was 2008 or 9.
2000.
Now, did you go back to school during that time?
So I went back to school to get my master's degree in health systems. I finished that in 2010. So,
Okay.
but to get into infection prevention, I did not have to do any additional coursework.
Excellent. Okay. And then, so I thought you were going to say that you ended up getting a job with the department that you interacted with so much, but it looks like you actually went to a different hospital for that first job. So,
I did.
tell me this: you obviously started, I assume, applying day one of the 5-year mark.
I did.
How long did it take you to actually land the first job?
So I knew just based on, I had some acquaintances that worked in infection prevention that were non-nurses, and they shared with me it took them many, many years to break into the field. So I actually started, before I started applying for positions, I started networking. And I would say about a year before I started applying for the positions is when I started talking to infection prevention professionals, particularly those that did not have nursing backgrounds, to understand, what was the key for you to get into the field and to get individuals and hiring managers to notice you. So within that year, developed that network, was introduced to APIC, and was able to connect there, broaden again my network. And then they started just giving me tools like, be flexible, apply for any job that you see that's open. Doesn't matter what it is, you just want to get in. And so that's exactly what I did. I started applying everywhere. At the time, I really could only stay within Houston, Texas. And so I applied for any position that was open in Houston, and just interviewed a number of times until I met that one leader that was open to giving me an opportunity. And she happened to be a nurse.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I want to dive into the networking piece a little bit because
Yeah.
that's a common thing that I've heard, but never this early on in a career, which is pretty cool. So you say you got connected with APIC. Was that a local chapter that you got invited to, or what was it like? I guess when you talk to people, a lot of people are kind of intimidated to go or participate at all in an association when they don't actually work in the field yet. So I'm assuming, but tell me, was it the local chapter you were mainly working with? And were you kind of the oddball in the group going in there, not working in a role, or was that a welcomed thing, or what was that interaction like?
Yeah, so I just as those that you speak of that may be intimidating of joining a local chapter, being the person that doesn't work in the field, I did not go in that route because I had that same fear. But what I did do was, the individuals that I knew that worked in infection prevention, they had networks, which then I asked them, hey, can I, maybe we can go out for happy hour, and then you can invite all of your colleagues so that I can then, kind of have a touch point and ask those questions in a little bit more of a casual environment.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I did it in a
Very
casual
cool.
way. Yeah. Just to understand what their experience was in the
Okay.
field.
Awesome. Okay. So you ended up at a job in the Houston area, which is awesome. You said that it was a nurse that ended up hiring you. So tell me talk me through the interview process a little bit. Was there any reservations in hiring a non-nurse? Did the hospital have non-nurses already, or were you the first one? Or what were you up
Yes.
against when you started
So
interacting with the leader?
for this particular hospital, I was the first non-nurse that they hired for the infection prevention role. Um, I remember there were a number of interviews. There were at least 4 sets of interviews that I had to go
Wow.
through. It was very intense. And I was surrounded by people that thought, how can you do this job? You are not a nurse. And these are stakeholders that are just like,
Right.
we're supposed to take advice from you. How do we know that you're capable and competent to do that? And so I really had to work in the background to really study the profession, study resources, anticipate questions that would be raised, and then utilize my background to respond to those questions. The one question I will never forget that I was asked by one of the executive leaders for the very first position, and this was a chief nursing officer. And she said, you don't work in the field. This would be a brand new position for you to start. We have a lot of challenges that we need to overcome. Why would we pick you? Right. And I just sat back, and of course, you have to be confident in these moments. You have to showcase that you can do the job. And I had the passion. I knew this is what I was called to do in my lifetime. And so I asked her, why wouldn't you? I said, and I basically went down the path that I have taken. I said, you have a team of nurses, of dynamic nurses. Yes, they are amazing at the work that they do. But wouldn't it be amazing to add another level, another professional skill in microbiology? Your expertise on the team right now is understanding human body and processes. And wouldn't it be amazing to add that perspective of microbiological points of view to that picture so that we can create a program or a solution for your hospital that you've not seen before? Why wouldn't you want
Wow.
that? Exactly. And she just sat back. She goes, I never thought about it that way. And so after that, they were just like, let's do it. Like, we'll take a chance.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you start your job, you're working as an IP there. It sounds like you have a team of RNs around you
Yes.
to help out. So what was the reception of the rest of the hospital staff? I mean, it's one thing for your CNO to support you. It's another thing for the physicians and the people working in the clinical setting to be all about it. Did you face opposition on that front?
Oh, all day, every day. Absolutely. However, I feel like one of my gifts is the gift of building relationships. And although initially, when we first were introduced, the stakeholders, the individuals, I'll just stick with the ones that I was responsible for in terms of oversight and providing surveillance for those particular areas. The first thing that I did was get to know those individuals. I didn't walk into the area to say, hi, I'm your infection preventionist. I'm going to be doing this, this, this. My first meeting with all of those individuals, just like, let's do a meet and greet. I just want to know about you. I don't want to know anything about the work that you're doing at this point. Let's connect and see, how we bond together and then ultimately build a solution for challenges that you're having in your area. So it was really connecting. And so because I did that early connection and getting early adoption that way, by the time I was ready to do my meetings to ask, what are your current challenges? What are the barriers? How can I support you? They already knew who I was. And so it was very informal. They're like, hey, Shaunte, oh my gosh, look at, we're talking like that when we're coming into the meeting. We'll spend 10 minutes and even talking, how are your children? Oh, you got a new puppy. Let's talk about that. And then we just easily transition into their challenges. And to me, that approach it helped me so much in everything that I've done, even with elevation in the field, because it's authentic. I don't want to come into a position or come into a situation where people don't know who I am authentically and know how I do things and know that they can trust me in sharing information that they may be a little bit concerned about or it's sensitive and they don't want to necessarily share it broadly, but want to at least say that this is a challenge that I think is going to be hard to overcome. But what do you think? And so I really love that I was able to do that coming into an organization. Although originally, no, they did not. There were some individuals that asked leadership to reassign me to a different area. They didn't think I would be
Wow.
qualified. There were situations like that. But then I was just like, let's hold, give me a chance, let's meet first. And then I would respect your decision if that's the direction that you want to go. And so I feel during that time, so it was 2008, I had to be better than the best in anything that I did. And so I had to put in the work in the background. But I knew it was important, regardless of that situation. I knew it was important for patient care and patient improvement or infection control improvement. And so I just did whatever I needed to do.
That's wow. And thankfully, I mean, the landscape's changed a little bit. So they're a little more receptive now. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. But obviously, there is still going to be a challenge for you to learn the clinical piece once you get in the job. So I want to know and clearly, I mean, you were a step ahead in a lot of areas, it sounds like. But how did you actually go about learning the clinical piece that you needed to know in the role?
Yeah. I had two amazing nurses as colleagues at my very first organization that I worked in. And both of them said that we are going to make you an honorary nurse. And so they put together my orientation to where I would actually be out there in the unit observing, key processes that infection prevention any infection prevention department would be concerned about. So I was, in the OR watching multiple surgeries, looking at the turnover that's happening in the areas, learning the various roles that happen in those spaces. I also was able to learn, what does the insertion of a central line look like? Doing that multiple times so that I could clearly understand and articulate some of the challenges and the risks associated with those procedures. I saw, indwelling devices for urinary catheters inserted, different types of products that would be used. So they really provided me an education where I could understand on the back end what those processes were. And then when we would have our one-on-one touch points, we'll talk about the language that I would hear, that you'll commonly hear nurses, discuss, what the terminology that physicians talk about or use, so that I can put all of that together and apply that to the work that I needed to do. I was very fortunate, I would say.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So tell me this. So first job, you go in, it feels like there's always kind of an eye-opening moment that's like, oh, wow, infection prevention covers this, or something that you just weren't expecting. So I'm curious, do you remember a moment when you started that role, or just anything that happened where you were just like, I didn't realize that was my job and that now you're more accustomed to? But was there anything like that threw you off? Just obviously you prep for it, you talk to a lot of people, but still it seems like there's always surprises in this field. So do you remember any moments like that?
So I remember the moment when I was assigned the Cardiovascular Institute. In my mind, I knew that I was going to be responsible for surgical site infection surveillance, right? And then all the components, the electronic system components that go with that. But then when it was like, okay, well, you probably need to start going into the OR so you can actually observe and see those practices and engage with the surgeons and all of that, I was just like, oh my God. Like, I think that part was really, for me at that point of being a baby IP, as I say, and then having to interact with surgeons that have been, working in their profession for decades, and then me having to come in and give them recommendation, that was so daunting for me.
Yeah.
But then again, I stepped back because originally I was just like letting my mind go, like, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. But I just had to take a step back and say, Shaunte, hey, come on, use your core skill, right? In any of these situations, use your core skill. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, let me come up with a solution where I can, meet with these surgeons outside of the OR, develop the relationships. So by the time I get in the OR, it's a different experience. My first experience in the OR, people were just like, what are they doing here? I had a surgeon stop what he was doing to go re-scrub his hands. He was like, I'm sure this is what you're here to see, right? Terrible experience in my mind. And so by the time I had these discussions offline, built those relationships, it transitioned to moments where I would go into the OR. I'm like, hey, this is my date around. How's everything going? I was like, oh, Shaunte, come in. They're doing an open heart surgery. Get that stool, step up here and look. And they're showing me their technique and they're describing what they're doing. I
Wow.
was like so in love. I was just like, this is so amazing that number one, my passion for medicine and being able to have that experience with my passion for infectious disease, and it just was a magical moment for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And tell me, so you're having all these new things thrown at you, intimidating things. When did you actually feel confident being like a point person? Like, I don't know. It feels like for a while you're going at it and you're offering advice and you're potentially a little timid and just kind of feel out of place. But when did you feel comfortable and confident providing guidance to these folks?
Yeah. So it was when I passed the certification exam. So when I got my CIC, hands down, it was just like, okay, you can't tell me anything. I can, I have the credentials to showcase that I am competent in doing this work. And so every time someone would come and say, oh, well, why should we take information? I'm board certified in infection prevention for CBIC, right? And so after that, I felt like my confidence just increased significantly. Of course, you channel that when you have those situations that require it. But then I just became an advocate. I know that I'm not the only one that experienced those challenges where people are questioning whether or not you're giving the correct advice. And so then I started going around like, hey, people that are not certified, let's get a group together, let's study together, let's get whatever you need to do, because I'm telling you this is what you need in order to move forward and progress and have people treat you with respect, especially with how you are delivering your recommendations. So hands down, CIC was the way to go.
Excellent. And let's talk a little more about the CIC. So what, and you mentioned it a little bit, but what prompted it? I think at that time there was a 2-year minimum work experience before you could take it.
Absolutely.
But was that more of a personal thing for you? Was that encouraged by your organization to do? Was there a financial incentive to get it done? I guess what caused you to go after that? I mean, sounds like as soon as you hit the 2-year mark.
Yeah, as soon as I hit the 2-year mark. So for me, I knew I had to have it because of the landscape of expertise within infection prevention. And so I knew that, anywhere I would go, even if it was promotion, based on what the culture was at that time, I would always be questioned on whether or not I was good enough. And so there was no other decision there. I knew that that's what I had to do. My organization, of course, encouraged it. It wasn't incentivized at the time. I just knew that that was what I needed to do to be able to continue to grow.
Gotcha. And was that a challenging test for you? Or you a good
Woo!
test taker? Or what was?
Let me tell you, I am, and I'll be very vulnerable with you in this moment.
There we go.
That test was not easy, at least for me. I have never been a standardized test taker ever in my life, which is why it was really important when I got CIC certified, because It took me 3 times to take that test to pass it.
Okay.
And I really had to, and it was so interesting. Even studying, I studied like I've never seen others study before to pass that exam. But it was the manner in which I studied for the exam led me to unsuccessful outcomes. So once I figured out, what was required, I did, I ordered books, I ordered all sorts of tools to help me. And then when I figured it out, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what my challenge was, because there are questions on there, or answers that are very close. Um, I would say there may be two of those responses that may be correct, but you got to make sure you're answering the question. So that's where I was going wrong. And once I
Gotcha.
figured that out, it was good.
Awesome. Good deal. So, all right. So you were in this role, looks like for about 2 years, and it looks like you moved to another staff level IP role at a pediatric facility. So what led to that? Did you just want a new challenge, or what was going on for that
Yeah,
transition?
yeah. So in my mind, I wanted to learn about every service line that I could, and how to utilize infection prevention knowledge for those particular service lines. Pediatrics, I shifted there because number one, I started my career at that pediatric hospital, and I thought it would be really amazing to be able to go back. These are people that I know, infection prevention is really built upon those relationships. So being able to go to an organization where you have those and then do that work, I felt like that was an amazing transition opportunity. And so
Yeah.
that's what I did. And so every area that you see on my resume, every move was strategic so that I can learn a different service line everywhere I went.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, and it didn't take you long after that. I mean, you were there for a year and a half and took a big jump. I mean, it looks like you jumped from staff level role to a regional manager position.
Yes.
That's, and it's just a little bit unheard of to make that jump. I mean, typically you go from staff level to maybe managing a small facility, sole preventionist, that sort of thing. But you always had a regional manager title. So tell me the
Mhm.
scope of that work and what that job was, and then we can kind of get into what the transition
Yeah.
was like.
Awesome. So I just want to point out though, so prior to me jumping into the regional manager position, I had already had the experience of, children's hospital. I worked in one of the largest institutions in Southeast Texas, and then transitioned to an academic medical center too. So that's important. So I had
Gotcha.
all of that experience prior to going into regional management. That experience was one of the best that I can say, um, really helped me build the skills that were required for me to move into the role that I'm in today. It was unique, it was challenging in that you have responsibility for multiple hospitals that have different C-suite leadership, that have different cultures in each of them. And I fell in love with that right away, that I could challenge myself to manage that many facilities, guide infection preventionists in those spaces, um, to be successful in the work that they're doing. Loved it. That was one of the best positions that I've had.
Yeah. And clearly you excel in the management aspect of things, but I know that obviously the day-to-day work is probably totally different when you go from managing a system than from being kind of a ground level IP. So
Yeah.
what was that transition like just from a day-to-day perspective? Is that something you just thrived in immediately, or did it take a second to learn? And did you miss being out on the floor, kind of doing the staff stuff for a little bit, or what was
Yeah.
talk through all that?
Yeah, of course, of course. So moving into a leadership position can be challenging initially. One, you still love to have that hands-on experience as an IP, and then moving into leadership, you don't have it as much. And so, of course, I think I would follow the same path as other leaders when they're first starting out, still trying to have your hands in the day-to-day activities, but also doing leadership.
Hmm.
But then at a point, I had to stop and think about this, after multiple leadership trainings. You know, how would, I had to ask my question all the time, how would you have liked if you were doing your role as an IP in any of your hospitals that you worked in and your leader was still doing the work alongside of you? How would you feel about that? And so I immediately had to transition away. I was like, you know what? We have to allow the infection prevention staff to do the work that they're empowered to do and serve as the champion in the background, the person that's going to remove barriers. That's ultimately my role, and also to encourage and influence and those sorts of things that leaders normally do. And so it took me about a year or so into that role to really start to sharpen those skills and focus on my role of making sure that the team felt supported. And I focused all of my energy in identifying opportunities that I can do that for them, and bring us together as a team, no matter which facility they're working in, so that we can create a support, a network, and know that anytime you need someone, we're always there for each other.
Gotcha. And tell me, so you were obviously had a ton of experience, a bunch of different service lines. I mean, you did it all. So you certainly were qualified for a manager role like this, but a lot of times it feels like just the management skill set in general is kind of an overlooked aspect of infection prevention. Just because
Mm-hmm.
there's so much thrown at you, there's so much to learn, um, just in the staff level role, that management is just that skill set is often forgotten. So I'm curious, did you find any ways to gain some management experience or skills in your staff level roles? And then, kind of as a follow up, you clearly were able to sell yourself as a manager in the interview process in order to land the job. So how did you do that?
Mm-hmm. So I started out even before I was in infection prevention. When I was in the laboratory, I had a senior position. So as a senior technologist, I was able to support the team, and it wasn't a management level or supervisory responsibility, but I was able to still, um, identify those opportunities where I can sharpen leadership there. And so I just transferred those skills over to infection prevention. And I think that also helped me, where I didn't start at the very basic level of trying to learn and develop leadership. I had the idea of what leadership um, should be like. I had mentors, and I had individuals that I saw and interacted with daily, that I thought that is the type of leader that I want to be. And I just emulated it.
Gotcha. Awesome. And okay, so you did this and you were in that role, looks like, for 3 years, which
Mhm.
then led you where you are today. Initially, you took on a system director role at UCLA, which is tremendous. And tell me, I guess, what was that? I mean, clearly you want to continue to challenge yourself and expand your scope. This is another academic medical center. You added a few more hospitals under your belt too, and it was a relocation for the first time
Yeah.
for you. So, were you actively pursuing the next step, or how did this all happen?
Yeah. So, and I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier in our talk. I am a firm believer that what's for you is for you. I did not actively look for this position. It was communicated to a firm that I had worked with many years, it might have been 15 years prior to that opportunity. And they recall when they had conversations with UCLA Human Resources Department, they described an individual, and what that person told me was that they described me. And so they encouraged me to apply for that position. And immediately I'm like, okay, which organization? Or like UCLA, like in the really large, amazing UCLA organization. I thought, I was daunted at first. I'm like, are you serious? Do you think they would really want me? Um, and so they were like, no, we're serious. You should start applying for the position. And so I applied. I was just like, open to the opportunity. It's an amazing organization, and the reputation just speaks for itself. And I'll apply, but I won't have any expectations outside of that, right? Because I'm just in my mind, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, this is UCLA. Oh my gosh. And I went through the process of interviewing. And when I tell you, the individual that shared with me that I needed to apply, it was like they were spot on. I went through that process and I felt like I was a missing piece of the puzzle. Like the people at UCLA, I cannot describe. Um, Very intelligent, very focused on patient safety and outcomes. And they do it in a way that's kind, and they care for individual colleagues. That is the first and foremost conversation that we have before we even dive into business. And I
Wow.
knew then it's like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I just did my very best through that process and prayed and hoped that I got that position. And here you go. What's
Here
for
you
you
are.
is for you.
There you go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
and you've been there a while now, and
8
we'll get into
years,
that in just a
yes.
second. 8 years, wow. So tell me, what was this transition like? I mean, it's your first time holding a director title. It sounds like a little more scope, but not a ton, probably
Right.
different than what you were doing in your
Mhm.
past role. But you relocated, which
Yes.
a lot of, I mean, typically, I mean, infection prevention is such a small industry. A lot of people that want to actively grow, I mean, a relocation is necessary to do that. Was the relocation aspect difficult for you? Was that something that you had in your head that you may have to do one day? Or
Yeah.
was this all just kind of thrown at you and you just kind of went with it?
Yeah. So relocation was very difficult for me. I was reared in Houston, went to high school there. I just grew up in Texas, and I never thought about leaving Texas at all. And I thought, long term, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, Texas is okay. So maybe, I may need to relocate to Dallas or something, but I'm never going outside of Texas. That was my whole goal. But then I had a mentor at the time, that shared, if you really want to continue to grow and develop as a leader, you have to be flexible and you have to be willing to move outside of the state and so I thought, okay, so I don't want to limit myself. And so I never thought I would go as far as California, that's for sure. But this was an amazing opportunity. And after lots of prayer, like, this is where I need to be. And so that's when I made that decision.
Cool. And it's clearly going well. So this is
Yeah.
great. And what was it like changing? I mean, you've had been in several different health systems to this point, but now doing a health system in a different state. So obviously different hospitals have different cultures,
Yeah.
but I imagine now you've got just the state in general and where you're living and just the people you're interacting with every day. That's a totally different culture too. Was that
Mhm.
difficult for you? Like, was that a bigger thing than you anticipated, or was it not an issue for you at all?
Yeah, so I'm a people person, so it wasn't a very very difficult transition. Just learning the culture in California, developing partnerships that way. It wasn't that big of a challenge. Yes, people are very different than what I'm accustomed to in Texas. But what was really the challenge for me was learning, um, you know, different regulatory requirements in California versus Texas. And so coming into a directorship, I needed to be knowledgeable of what those changes are. I needed to project where the organization was going to go, what are the threats. And so for me, I felt I needed to learn all of that in order to do my job effectively. And so I spent a number of months really mapping that out, trying to understand what those differences were or are, and move forward from there.
And tell me this. So obviously, you hear the name UCLA. It's a renowned place. You were clearly felt that way when you started speaking to them, even.
Mhm.
So tell me about you. You take the job, you walk into your first day. I mean, did it hit you immediately that like you are now the person there, or did it take you a year before you really accepted like no, there's no one to look to, like this is me, like I'm that person now representing this facility. I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, I I would say it took me a couple of months to really like I had people like, am I here? Really? Like I cannot believe that this is happening. This is such an amazing experience. Um, but everyone was so welcoming and supportive um, that I quickly adjusted into the UCLA culture. And we have physician colleagues that I work with very closely, and even them. I mean, just they just wrap their arms around me and just like we are here to support you. So it was a really nice transition, and I quickly realized, okay, I'm UCLA. But it wasn't until we had like we have lots of regulatory visits in California. I'm sure that's I don't know if that's unique for California, but I find we have more than we did in Texas.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
After like that fourth or fifth one that we had, I remember then thinking, okay, like I am officially a part of the UCLA team. And so,
That's
yeah, it was amazing.
that's awesome. All right, I want to spend a second talking about kind of your, I'll say, extracurricular work. So I I believe you've taken part in presentations and publications, and now you've added some faculty stuff onto your plate. Like
Yeah.
you've done all this stuff kind of on the side. What motivated that? I mean, was it all to advance the profession? Was this just something that you felt you wanted to do? But just tell me the extra things you're involved with now and why you started doing those things.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest project that I'm working on now is really to help support expansion of the field and to allow opportunities for individuals that have a passion for infection prevention, may not have the basic knowledge to be able to translate into a position or a career in IP. Um, I felt that that was a part of the work that I needed to do as an individual that came into infection prevention the way that I did. So, with a background that was novice at the time, I made it my mission to identify opportunities to be able to do that. So, the one project I have that's going now is the Infection Prevention and Control Certificate Program that's offered at UCLA, and that essentially provides the core foundation of infection prevention for those professionals looking to transition into a career in infection prevention, so that they can gain that knowledge, be able to speak intelligently in interviews, and then you have that certificate on your resume to showcase that you've done the work to be able to get that knowledge, so that it's easier for hiring managers. If they're hiring these individuals, they don't have to start from scratch. Like you can teach them on the job because they've had the exposure. The program is really amazing, and we have certified professionals that are teaching these courses. And my role is to really I created the program, and I'm continuing to expand it so that we can create a pipeline of infection preventionists that can be tapped into globally.
That's amazing. Okay, and is that a virtual thing?
Yes, it's 100% virtual. So we offer that asynchronously. And then after they complete that, right now I'm starting to work on it or to refine an internship program through UCLA, so that once they're complete with that portion of it, if they still want that hands on experience outside of what they've gotten online, then we can have opportunities to do that.
That's outstanding. That's great. And I'll definitely want to encourage that. So we'll do that too.
Awesome.
But tell me, you've got your fellowship of APIC. When
Yes.
did that happen, and what motivated that?
Yeah, so that happened. I was part of the 2023 cohort. I've always had my eye on it, and I remember when I reviewed the application process and the requirements, I thought, wow, I think I will apply for this when I feel comfortable and confident that I would be able to meet all of those requirements. And I thought, yeah, I probably need to be, 10 years in the field, or at first I thought maybe 20 years in the field, but then all of the experience that I've been able to gain over the past 16 years, I thought, why not try now? You have all of that experience. And so I applied for it and was accepted. So it's really excited
Awesome.
about it.
You obviously, now at your level, you've set in probably hundreds of interviews now at this point for IPs, and you're teaching classes now and doing things. But I imagine you have a pretty good idea of who is going to make a good IP. So I'm curious, from a personality standpoint, mostly, is there anything that you find to be very common, or anything that you notice off the bat to where you're like, you know what, that person's got it, like she will thrive in this role? What do you look for? What are some signs that you kind of lack on or catch on to that makes for
absolutely the professionals that take time to identify opportunities to connect with those that are in the field in ways that are not customary, meaning they have that passion and drive, and they're like, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to make it happen. I see those professionals do really, really well in the field. I have a lot of those individuals on the team here. I've had people that were doing cold calling. I really want to be an IP. What can I do? You just tell me, and and I will make it happen. And they are flourishing right now as infection preventionists. So I would say it's the passion, and it's the willingness to go the extra mile to get what you want, what you feel you need to succeed. Those are the ones that I really keep my eye on. I'm like, yeah, they're going to go far.
I like it. And then tell me quickly, you hinted on this at the very beginning, and it might be enough to be good, but I do want to hear quickly your hiring philosophy, or your philosophy of like what makes a good team. Clearly you're a non-nurse. You're not one of the kind of old school train of thoughts where you need a team full of nurses.
Right.
But what is, if you could put together your like perfect team, and what backgrounds do you look for? What do you want? What makes for a solid team?
For me, it's having professionals that have multiple diverse backgrounds. So a team, and I'm probably going to be describing the teams that I've worked with, a respiratory therapist, a microbiologist, public health professional, anyone that has diverse experience that they can bring to the table makes the best team, because you have those experts on your team that you can tap into when there are issues that come up with ventilator associated pneumonias. You have an OR nurse that's, if there's surgical site infection challenges, they're like, oh, I remember this is a risk and we need to dive into. And so having those unique backgrounds on one team is very strong.
Gotcha. Okay. And this is for the final thought of this. I just want to kind of open the floor a little bit to let you, obviously, that most people that are engaging with this content are people looking at the field or people wanting to advance in the field, but there's also going to be a handful of people that may be experiencing burnout or just kind of not knowing what's next for them after they've worked in it for a minute. So I just want to open the floor and see, do you have any advice or encouragement for these folks as far as why or why not to be in this field?
Yeah. And speaking to the thing that I can think of that pops into my head right now, that impacts both those that are burning out or have already burned out, or those that are trying to get into the field, do not give up. If this is where you want to be and you've not yet been successful at doing it, keep going. Identify individuals that are already in the field, connect, get advice, get a mentor that's already in the field, and follow that guidance until you're able to get where you want to go. And for those that feel that they are burning out, I know that this is a very challenging field to be in, but how rewarding is it to have that calling that you are impacting the lives of patients? And so I would also say, don't give up. reach out to get support that you need to be able to continue your calling in saving lives. And I will happily recommend connecting with me if you need to, because I know that you are needed in this field, and I'll do whatever I need to do to make sure that you continue that work.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Voice for Infection Prevention. We hope you found our discussions informative and insightful. Remember to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with experts in the field, and don't forget to leave us a review to let us know what you think. For additional resources and to stay updated on the latest news in infection prevention, visit our website at voiceforip.com. Thank you again for listening. Until next time, stay safe and continue your commitment to excellence in infection prevention.